The wind came screaming off the mesa, kicking up red dust that clung to skin like guilt and stung the eyes like truth. The desert stretched wide and cruel, scarred with bone-white rock and sunburnt sagebrush. The sun rode high overhead, blistering the world beneath it, cracking lips, bending spines, and bleeding color from every living thing. There was no mercy in that heat, only survival, and sometimes not even that. Dry Hollow sat in the hollow of two dead hills, a half-built town with a saloon, a mercantile, and more graves than people. Paint peeled from the church's steeple, which hadn't heard a sermon in 3 years. Every plank creaked, like it resented the weight it bore, and in the shadows of that dusty place ruled Tanner Blake, a man whose smile came easy and violence easier. He and his boys ran the saloon and the rest of the town with a quiet certainty that no one would stand in their way. Down the road came a figure, staggering, limping, a girl not more than 20, barefoot and swollen with child. Her dress was torn at the hem, dirty from days on the trail, her hands trembling as she held her belly. Flies buzzed around her face, but she didn't swat them away. Her name was Clara May, and she had walked near 20 miles on nothing but grit and hope. Her husband, a good man named Elijah, had been crushed beneath a collapsed rail bridge 2 towns over. No compensation, no funeral, just a body left in a blanket and a promise that there was nothing they could do. She'd buried him herself in borrowed land, said her last words with dirt in her mouth, and no one listening. Since then, she'd been drifting, looking for food, for shelter, for anything. When Clara stepped into Dry Hollow, her eyes darted toward the saloon. It was the only place showing signs of life, the rest of the street as empty as a church after a funeral. She pushed open the swinging doors, the creak of the hinges cutting through the murmured laughter and the clink of bottles. All conversation died the moment they saw her. She didn't flinch. "I'm sorry to bother," she said, voice hoarse, "but I ain't eaten in 2 days. If there's any scraps to spare." A low chuckle stopped her. One of Tanner's men, a thick-necked brute named Rory, rose from his seat and sauntered toward her. His boots thudded like drums on the warped wood floor. He smelled of sweat and whiskey. "You hungry, sweetheart?" he drawled, his grin missing 2 teeth. "Well now, I might have something for you to eat." Laughter erupted behind him. Clara's face burned. She stepped back, but Rory grabbed her arm, rough and unkind. She looked him straight in the eye, her voice low but sharp. "I ain't that kind of hungry." And then she slapped him. Hard. The saloon went still. Rory's grin vanished, and in its place came a snarl. He shoved her to the floor. The crowd didn't move. No one helped. One by one, they turned away, sipping their drinks, pretending not to see. Clara tried to stand, but a boot caught her side and sent her tumbling. Another kick. A curse. Blood at the corner of her lip. "Don't matter if she's pregnant," someone said near the bar. "Shouldn't mouth off." The gang circled her now, half-drunk and fully cruel, hooting like jackals around a dying deer. One yanked at her dress. Another called her a whore. Clara curled up, arms around her belly, choking on dirt and shame. Then came the sound of wagon wheels, the slow creak of a buckboard pulling to a stop, and silence fell like a thunderclap. Boots hit the ground. One step, then another. Dust swirled as a man walked toward the saloon doors, his silhouette framed against the boiling sky. He was tall, broad at the shoulders, with a long duster coat that flapped around his legs. A wide brim that shaded most of his face, but the set of his jaw and the slow, deliberate pace of his steps made the gang shift uneasily. He didn't speak when he entered, didn't draw a weapon, just took in the scene. Clara bleeding on the floor, the gang above her like vultures. Rory turned to him, scoffing. "Ain't your business, old man." The stranger didn't blink. He walked straight to Clara, knelt down, and lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing. Her eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but he only shook his head. Then he looked up at the gang. "She's with me now," he said. 3 words. Nothing more. But they hit like bullets. Rory took a step back, hand drifting toward his pistol. But his fingers stopped. Something about the man's stillness, the way he looked at them like he'd already measured the outcome and buried it, made even the boldest hesitate. The bartender swallowed hard. Ain't seen you in a while, Cal. The stranger's gaze didn't leave the gang. He turned slowly, cradling Clara against his chest, and walked out the same way he came in. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. Behind him, the saloon stayed silent. On the boardwalk, an old ranch hand leaned in close to another and whispered, "That's old Cal. Thought he was dead." "Or worse," came the reply. Rory stood frozen, jaw tight. "He's gonna wish he was." Inside the saloon, Tanner Blake had been watching from the stairs. He lit a match with his thumb, the flame dancing in his eyes. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "The ghost came back to haunt me." He flicked the match into a half-empty bottle. It fizzled out. Then Tanner smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that meant death was coming. Clara awoke to the gentle creak of wood and the smell of stew thick with beans, onion, and something savory that made her stomach twist with hunger. Light poured through the narrow window, soft and golden, illuminating the dust motes that floated like snowflakes. She was wrapped in a patchwork quilt, clean and warm, and her bare feet rested on a woven rug that didn't itch her skin. Outside, the wind whispered through juniper and canyon rock, distant and lonesome but not cruel. She sat up slowly, every muscle aching, her belly sore and tight. The pain in her ribs was dull now, not sharp, bound tight by a linen bandage. A wooden chair creaked beside her. On it sat a man with weathered skin and shoulders like old timber, his hand steady as he stirred the contents of a cast-iron pot resting on a small wood-burning stove. He looked at her, only once, then turned back to his work. "You're safe here," he said. She wanted to ask who he was, what price safety carried, but his voice was calm and dry, like the canyon wind, and the warmth of the blanket wrapped around her said more than his words did. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. Then he rose and walked outside, letting the door thud gently behind him. The ranch sat at the edge of a red rock bluff, high enough to see the river winding far below, like a silver ribbon. There was a chicken coop, a corral with 2 horses, a small garden fighting valiantly against the dry earth. Clara watched him from the window as he scattered feed for the hens and checked the fence posts, his movements slow but sure, like a man who'd been doing it a long time and didn't need to think about it anymore. By the second day, she was on her feet, moving gingerly but determined. She swept the porch, hauled water in a tin bucket, and even fed the chickens, who squawked and pecked like they'd never been fed before. Cal never asked about the baby, never questioned where she'd come from or who had hurt her. He just brought her boiled eggs in the morning, handed her clean linens in the evening, and nodded when she thanked him. He didn't talk much, but he listened well, and his silence felt like protection, not indifference. "You always live out here alone?" she asked him once, brushing her hair back as they sat beneath the porch's shade, watching the sky bleed orange over the canyon. He shifted in his chair. "Used to be more folks around, but things change." She studied his face. He looked older up close, but strong, eyes like river stone, cold at first, but with something deeper moving behind them. "Don't mean to pry," she said softly, "but what made you stay out here, all alone?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "A man leaves things behind when he wants to be someone new." She didn't ask what he'd left behind. Not then. Back in town, tongues wagged. Dry Hollow wasn't kind to mystery. The sight of Clara in Cal's wagon, bruised but breathing, had spread faster than fire on prairie grass. The story twisted each time it was told. Some said Cal had taken her hostage. Others whispered he was building himself a little family out of strays. The truth didn't matter. Gossip did. Tanner Blake heard it over whiskey and cards. One of his men, twitchy and eager, said Cal had carried Clara out like some night in a dime novel. The table went quiet. Tanner's lip curled. "He's got no right making me look weak." "He's just an old man," someone muttered. Tanner's voice was cold. "Then it'll be easy to bury him." At the ranch, clouds began to gather. A storm rolled in heavy and dark, thunder growling deep in the distance. Cal worked faster, tightening the barn doors, hammering boards across weak windows, and moving the horses into shelter. Clara helped where she could, her fingers clumsy with rope and nails, but Cal didn't stop her. That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls. Rain beat the roof like fists. Sleep wouldn't come. Clara wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and stepped barefoot into the barn, guided by the glow of a lantern left swinging from a nail. She needed to feel calm, to hush the unease rising in her chest like floodwater. In the corner of the barn stood an old trunk, oak with rusted iron bands. It looked untouched by time, forgotten but not discarded. Something about it called to her. Her fingers brushed the lid. Locked. She searched the tool bench, found a rusted hook, and pried it open. Inside lay 2 revolvers, silver-polished and sleeping. A tarnished marshal's badge rested beside them. Beneath that, folded papers, yellowed and brittle. She pulled them out, heart pounding. They were wanted posters. One after another, the same face stared up at her, slightly younger, clean-shaven, eyes sharp as broken glass. The name beneath read, Calderboone. Alias, the Canyon Ghost. Dead or alive. /$2. 000 reward. ***. A boot step echoed behind her. She froze. I was wondering when you'd find that, Cal said quietly. She turned, clutching the papers to her chest. Is it true? She asked. You're him. He sighed, walked over, and sat on an overturned feed barrel. The storm outside pounded louder, as if demanding he answer. Used to be, he said. Long time ago. I was a bounty hunter, marshal for a while. Tracked killers from Utah to Mexico. Folks called me the Canyon Ghost, 'cause I didn't leave trails, just graves. He looked up at her, face pale in the lantern light. One job in Yuma. Some outlaw holed up at a saloon. He grabbed a kid as a shield. I hesitated. Too long. When I pulled the trigger, it passed through him and hit the boy. Clara's breath caught. I never touched a gun again after that, he said. Walked till I found a place no one knew me. Built this ranch. Planted things. Fed chickens. He chuckled, but it was hollow. Tried to bury Calderboone out here. Thought maybe the land could forgive what a man couldn't. Clara stared at him, the storm raging all around them. And yet, in the space between them, there was only stillness. You saved me, she whispered. I owed someone, he replied. I couldn't save that boy. But maybe I could save you. She stepped forward, knelt beside him, and took his withered hand. You did more than that, she said. You made me feel human again. He didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around hers, and that said more than words ever could. The horses came fast and wild, their hooves churning up red dust like thunderclouds. 6 riders, black silhouettes against the sun, galloped hard across the flatlands, rifles strapped and pistols swinging from hips. At their head rode Tanner Blake, a cruel grin carved into his face like a scar. The wind tore at his coat, but he sat tall, straight-backed, like a man who believed the world owed him obedience. He spat a wad of tobacco into the dust and growled to the others, Bring the girl back, and shoot the ghost where he stands. No one argued. They knew what Tanner expected when he gave orders, and what happened to those who failed to carry them out. At the ranch, Calderboone stood at the fence line, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. He saw the dust long before he saw the riders. He didn't move, just leaned a little heavier on the gatepost, the wind tugging gently at the loose edges of his coat. Clara stepped out onto the porch behind him. It's them, isn't it? He nodded once. They're coming fast. What do we do? His voice was quiet, steady. You go down to the storm cellar. Lock the door. Don't come up till I say. I'm not leaving you alone. Clara, he said, turning to her. Please. She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the house. Cal walked slow to the barn, the dust and wind rising around him. The world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, he knelt before the old chest once more. The silver revolvers gleamed like sleeping vipers. He picked them up, tested the weight. His fingers moved over them like they remembered. His hands trembled only once, then steadied. By the time the riders reached the edge of the yard, Cal was standing in the center of the clearing, a gun on each hip, coat buttoned up tight, the wind tugging at his sleeves. Tanner pulled his horse to a stop and surveyed the scene with smug satisfaction. Well, look here, he called. The ghost come out to play. Turn around. Cal said. You got no business here. See, I think I do. That girl you dragged off? She belongs to Dry Hollow. You made a fool out of me in front of my men. She doesn't belong to you. She ain't anyone's to own. Tanner's smile curled. Then I guess we'll just have to take her back the hard way. A beat of silence passed. Then suddenly guns blazed. The first man never even cleared his holster. Cal's shot caught him clean in the chest. The second went down with a cry, blood spilling across his saddle. The others scattered, firing wild, bullets snapping past Cal's ears, digging into the earth around him. Cal dropped low, rolled behind a water trough, fired twice more. A scream. Another body fell. He moved like he had years ago, fast, exact, each movement carved from instinct and muscle memory. But the years hadn't left him untouched. His breathing came hard, sharp, and pain laced through his side like fire. Tanner circled wide, firing from behind a rain barrel. Ain't so fast now, are you, Boone? Cal reloaded with trembling fingers. His coat was ripped near the shoulder, blood seeping into the fabric. A shot cracked from the barn. Cal ducked and returned fire, catching one of the last men in the thigh. The rider screamed and went down, dragging dust with him. Then it was just Tanner. They stood across from each other, 10 paces apart. Dust spiraled between them like smoke from a fire that refused to die. Tanner sneered. You should have stayed dead, Ghost. He raised his pistol. Cal's hand twitched, but too slow. The shot rang out, and Cal stumbled backward, his leg giving way beneath him. He hit the ground hard, revolver skidding from his fingers. Tanner advanced, boots thudding, mouth twisted in a grin of triumph. Always knew you were just a man under all that legend. Soft now. Old. He stood over Cal, raised the pistol, and then a voice rang out, strong and sure behind him. You don't touch him. Tanner froze. Clara stood behind him, feet planted, Cal's old rifle braced against her shoulder. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. You lay one more finger on him, and I swear I'll put you down. Tanner turned slowly, laughter bubbling in his throat. You. With that. The shot cracked like thunder. Tanner staggered. He looked down at his chest. Blood blossomed across his shirt, vivid and red, soaking through like spilled wine. He dropped his pistol, stumbled once more, then collapsed in the dirt. Silence. Clara rushed to Cal's side, falling to her knees beside him. He was pale, sweating, but alive. She pressed her hand to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. You all right? She whispered, voice breaking. He coughed once. I've had worse. You're bleeding bad. He gave a weak smile. Been a while since I had someone to patch me up. She tore fabric from her dress and pressed it tight against the wound. Around them, the dust began to settle. The air smelled of gunpowder and iron. Cal looked up at the sky, eyes squinting against the sun. I thought I buried him, he said quietly. That ghost. But maybe ghosts are what you need when men like Tanner walk free. Clara wiped the blood from his cheek. Maybe some ghosts come back for a reason. The month that followed passed like a second life. Clara stayed on the ranch. She learned to ride, to plant, to shoot without flinching. Her belly grew rounder, and her laughter began to return in short bursts like the arrival of spring. The house smelled of stew and bread, and the wind that once sounded like morning now sang low and kind through the canyon walls. Cal rode into Dry Hollow once a week. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wear the badge, but he didn't need to. The townsfolk watched him pass with lowered eyes and quiet nods. No one asked about Tanner. No one asked about the girl. They called him Boone again, not with fear, but with respect. At night sometimes they sat on the porch, Cal, Clara, and the baby kicking within her, and watched the sky stretch out above them. He would tell her stories from the old days, and she would listen, hand resting on his, eyes soft. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew. Legends don't die. They just wait for the right time to rise.